On the planet Yautja Prime, a young hunter seen as weak named Dek takes part in a demanding training exercise. He uses different tools to move around the area until he enters a cave where his scanner indicates that his brother is hiding nearby. Dek attacks from behind with his sword, but Kwei manages to stop the blow just in time. Then both begin an intense fight, while Kwei mocks him, trying to get Dek to use the rocky environment to his advantage. The swords clash again and again in a sequence of calculated moves. In the end, Kwei manages to corner Dek, but does not kill him. When Dek refuses to surrender, Kwei cuts the column they are standing on, and Dek falls into the void. Before falling completely, Dek manages to grab onto the wall, climbs back up, and attacks again, determined not to lose. Later, aboard his ship, Kwei explains that Dek must choose a victim to earn his place within the Yautja clan. Dek wants to go to the planet Genna, also called the Death Planet, to hunt the immortal creature known as Kalisk. Even his father fears him, and that is precisely why Dek wants to face him. He is tired of being considered weak. Kwei does not approve of the decision, but Dek stands by his hunting vow. At that moment, his father, Njhorr, returns, and Dek greets him with a gesture of respect by offering a sample of blood. He is surprised to see him alive and admits that he ordered Kwei to kill him for being unworthy of the clan. Kwei, however, believes that his brother deserves to prove himself in a real hunt. Furious, the father throws a device that traps Dek and orders Kwei to finish him off. But Kwei releases him and uses his technology to push him into the ship, covering him with his shield as his father begins to fire. After sealing the ship, Kwei faces his father head-on. In just a few moves, he manages to disarm him, but the father activates his invisibility before Kwei can cut off one of his arms. When Kwei tries to reach his lost arm instead of his sword, it is already too late. Using his last strength, Kwei activates the ship so that Dek travels to Genna. Dek watches helplessly as his brother is left behind, while the takeoff knocks him unconscious. Sometime later, Dek wakes up to an alarm. The ship has been struck by fragments in space and is rapidly falling toward Genna. He runs to the emergency seat, activates it, and falls at high speed toward the ground. When a giant bird almost crashes into him, he turns on his shield and finally lands in the jungle. Annoyed, but determined to prove his ability, he checks his equipment to confirm everything is still working. A strange sound puts him on alert, and upon checking, a living climbing plant takes a weapon from him. Another grabs his arm, forcing him to cut it off. Then, many vines try to trap him, dragging him across the ground. Dek fights using a bow, strikes, and his sword, but they keep increasing. He manages to jump onto one of them and run across the top until reaching a cliff where he gets a better view. Genna is a living and dangerous world. In the river, he washes his wound and finds a healing plant with his scanner. He looks at a worm that grows and produces red spheres. When thrown, it explodes. He continues his search for the Kalisk and comes across red plants that made a dangerous noise, so he moves forward with caution. He then perceives a strange voice and notices Thea trapped in a massive nest. He activates his universal translator upon realizing that Dek cannot understand her, and she introduces herself as an artificial being created by Wayland Yutani. Suddenly, a scavenger bird from Genna drops a stone onto the plants, triggering a rain of paralyzing spikes. Thea warns him of the danger, while Dek tries to avoid the objects. However, he is struck and begins to feel dizzy. Thea asks him for a weapon, and he throws one of his to her. Before losing consciousness, Thea throws herself at the bird and violently eliminates it. Dek barely manages to see her say goodbye before passing out. When he regains consciousness, he notices that Thea administered him an antidote obtained from the same toxic plants. As he helps her to stand, he realizes that half of her body is missing. She explains that she was sent because humans cannot survive on Genna. Thea reminds him that many Yautja have been defeated by the Kalisk, but that she is still alive. If he takes her with him, she will lead him to the hiding place. He will get his reward, and she will get her legs back. Dek understands that the Kalisk was the one who tore her apart, but he still hesitates until Thea presents herself as a useful resource. Then he decides that he is not breaking the rules by using her as help and agrees to carry her. As they move forward, Thea keeps talking non-stop. At a river, some worms begin to spit acid, so Dek lifts her to escape. The path is blocked, and Thea takes advantage of it to show him. She throws a fruit that distracts the worms, and they stop attacking. Dek cuts vines and ties Thea to his back to move more easily. They spend the night camping, and Thea tells him that her group arrived 2 years earlier, but that after the Kalisk's attack, she was trapped for 2 weeks in the nest, waiting for another synthetic named Thesa to save her. Thea says that synthetics have more sensitivity than other models. Dek sees it as a disadvantage.
Thea sees it as an advantage. Meanwhile, at the Weyland-Yutani base, it is discovered that Thesa is identical to Thea. She was repaired after the attack, and now her system detects the presence of a Yautja, marking it as a threat. They tell her that Thea was captured by a predator. At dawn, Dek goes out to look for food. He finds a bone bison, a common prey of the Kalisk, but the field is full of cutting grass. When he is about to throw his sword, a small creature falls from a tree, and Thea cannot recognize it. Dek growls. The creature responds with a defiant growl and starts running after the prey. Annoyed by having a rival, Dek jumps between the trees so as not to fall behind. The weight breaks a branch. To avoid touching the dangerous cutting grass on the ground, Dek drives his sword into the tree trunk and stops the fall just in time. As the skeletal bison approaches, Dek jumps onto its back and stabs it. However, the creature shakes violently and throws them against another tree. The small being rolls on the ground, and, annoyed, Dek charges at it to start a fight, causing Thea, still tied to his back, to be crushed several times. Despite its size, the small one shows impressive strength, but after a struggle, Dek manages to grab it by the neck. At that moment, the bison attacks them again. Dek throws his sword, pries open the creature's strong jaws with his hands, and the well-sharpened blade wrapped in fire makes a clean cut. Dek shouts proudly, celebrating the successful hunt, when suddenly a tentacle grabs his leg and lifts him. They have been caught by a lunabug, whose tentacle-shaped tongue squeezes so tightly that Dek cannot activate any device, just as they are about to be eaten. The small creature jumps into the monster's mouth and covers its teeth with its tough skin, breaking them. The lunabug, in pain, spits them out and walks away over the cutting grass without being harmed. Wanting revenge, Dek knocks down a tree to make a bridge. The small creature spins across the field, and the lunabug catches it again with its tongue. At that moment, Dek lands on its head and drives his sword into the monster, opening a wound large enough to finally finish it off. Meanwhile, Tessa and her group of synthetics continue searching for Thea. They find Dek's pod, but are attacked by the living vines. The unit fires to stop them, and then uses flamethrowers to turn them into ash. As night falls, Dek and Thea set up camp again. The small creature keeps following them and imitates every action of Dek, amazed by his skill hunting the bison. Thea calls him Bud. While Dek distributes the cooked meat from his hunt, Thea asks him about his relatives. He tells what happened with his brother and his father, although he denies being sad when Thea uses that word. She tells him that just as Tessa is her sister, they could see themselves as a family, and Thea likes that idea. In the middle of the night, Tessa and the synthetics find Dek's ship, fallen after his jump. They discover many Yautja weapons, including a grenade that freezes Tessa's hand. At dawn, Dek takes Thea and leaves without Bud. He claims that Yautja hunt alone, and that Thea does not count as a companion. Thea tells him about wolves, and how they hunt in groups, where the true leader is not the one who kills the most, but the one who takes care of their own. Dek, without understanding the lesson, insists on being the leader who eliminates the most. After finding a Kalisk tooth near the river, the two follow that clue and arrive at Thea's shelter, completely destroyed by the creature. Among many artificial bodies, Thea finds her legs. Fortunately, the repair machine still works and can reattach them, although the procedure will take time. She thanks Dek for helping her, but also asks him to leave because she activated a signal to call her team. If the artificial beings are after the Kalisk, she cannot let Dek hunt it first. Dek refuses. He prefers to die with dignity rather than escape like a coward. He finds fuel leaks among the remains and sets them on fire to create a thick column of smoke. The Kalisk appears immediately and lunges at Dek, damaging his sword. Dek improvises a defense with a piece of metal. He slides under the monster and manages to slice open its belly. Then he throws a small knife at its head and cuts off its tail. But the creature recovers immediately and its wounds heal. That is the reason why it is considered impossible to eliminate. The Kalisk grabs Dek and throws him against the repair machine, causing Thea's legs to fall to the floor. When the monster grabs him again, Dek cuts off its tongue to free himself. The fight continues with attacks that Dek dodges, while Thea tries to recover her legs. She finds a weapon on the floor and fires to distract the monster. Dek takes advantage of the moment to throw a chain into its mouth and activate a machine that winds up the metal, dragging the Kalisk backward. He grabs Thea's weapon and fires non-stop. When the monster's tail lunges at him, Dek dodges it and closes the door to a storage room, leaving it trapped. Then he runs over the Kalisk's body, jumps onto its head, and decapitates it with precision. But not even that kills it. The head reattaches to the body within seconds. The Kalisk pins Dek to the ground with a large claw and smells him. Something in his scent makes it stop. It doesn't eat him. That moment is broken when Thea throws a freezing grenade, which freezes both the Kalisk and Dek, leaving them ready to be captured. Dek wakes up later, tied to a table inside the team's ship. Thea is resting, connected to the repair machine, while Tessa reviews all her data. She doesn't understand how Dek is still alive if the Yautja usually kill their weak offspring. She thinks that working for Weyland-Yutani should be an honor for him. Then, Tessa wakes Thea and congratulates her for obtaining 2 samples. She gives Dek a very painful injection to conduct tests on him. Thea tries to save him by speaking calmly, reminding that Dek is just a runt, an imperfect being, and not very useful for research, and suggests keeping only his weapons. Tessa insists on taking a sample and connects cables to his head, causing him intense pain. Thea turns off the machine in a desperate act and begs Tessa to be something more than machines that only follow orders. She wants them to be sisters. Tessa, without showing any emotion, says that she never came back to save her. She only returned for the Kalisk. She shares the Yautja idea of eliminating the weak and calls Thea defective. At that moment, she receives a call from Earth and leaves, giving orders to have Thea packed. Since the guard does not understand the Yautja language, Dek asks Thea to make him open one of her devices. She explains that it is a map, and when the guard activates it, his head explodes. Thea immediately releases Dek, and the alarm goes off. More guards come running and begin to shoot. Thea opens the back door, and Dek throws himself toward a waterfall to escape. Hours later, Dek finds his ship destroyed and tends to his wounds. There are no weapons left. For a moment, he thinks about escaping the planet, but upon seeing his brother's helmet, he remembers the lesson about wolves. The best one is the one who takes care of his group. He returns to the jungle and begins to gather pieces of sharp grass to use as knives, spines from red flowers, and corrosive worms trapped with sticky fruits. While working, he encounters Vod again and senses his scent. In the end, he understands that Vod is the offspring of the Kalisk, and that he survived before because Vod also had his scent. Then he covers Vod with his own saliva, making sure he remains protected. Finally, he frees Thea's legs so she can guide them to her and reunite with her owner. In the new base of the Artificials, Dek bursts in wearing armor crudely made from bison bones. He immediately attacks a sentinel by throwing acid to knock it down. Meanwhile, Thea's legs, guided by a signal from the upper part of her body, move inside a resting chamber. 2 sentinels try to stop them, but Dek defeats them with a whip made from climbing plants and sharp grass leaves. Vad also joins the attack and destroys a sentinel in a matter of seconds. The pair continues moving through the base silently, eliminating every artificial that crosses their path to allow Thea's legs to advance without obstacles. Meanwhile, Tessa informs the company that they will soon return to Earth with the Kalisk, falsely claiming that Dek has died, equipped with weapons crudely made from the natural dangers of Yenna. Dek continues defeating the guards, even fighting several at once. In a laboratory, one manages to corner him, but Dek breaks a container where a sample of live climbing plants is kept, which then attack and finish off the synthetic. In the end, the legs find the box where Thea is. They jump to the neck of the guard watching her and quickly kill him, opening the container to take her out. Thea wakes up happy, but upon hearing guards approaching, she pretends she is still inactive. When the synthetics get closer,
The legs knock one to the ground, while Thea lunges at another. Both parts work together perfectly, eliminating their attackers with well-coordinated movements until they finish them all. Dek reaches the box, but it is already empty. At that very moment, a guard tries to attack him from behind, but Thea stops him with a shot. Her body is whole again, and she is surprised to see that Dek came back for her like a fierce protector. She wants to escape, but Dek says they must first release the Kalisk so that Vod can see his mother again. At that moment, an alarm goes off. Thea orders to speed up the takeoff of the ship carrying the Kalisk. While checking the situation, a group finds Dek, who activates the corrosive worms, causing an explosion that eliminates several synthetics at the same time. Then, Thea appears operating a combat suit and shoots at Dek with a beam she took from her ship, destroying his worm friend. The synthetic leader devastates everything in her path and deploys a large rotating saw while Dek dodges every attack. On the main ship, Thea tries to open the Kalisk's cage, but it is locked. A guard discovers her, and unable to convincingly copy Thesa, as well as noticing the small Kalisk, he smashes his head against the cage, uses his eyes as a key, and manages to open it. An impact throws Dek into the laboratory, and the exosuit crushes him with its mechanical hand. However, the living plant in the laboratory traps the suit's arm. Dek tries to climb up the structure, but Thesa throws him far away again, forcing him to hide behind a container. When she lifts it to look for him, Dek is already on top of it and leaps onto her, striking the exosuit. But Thesa closes the pilot cabin to protect herself. At that moment, the Kalisk, now free, leaps onto the suit. Thesa turns on the saw and tries to stab it into him, lifting him off the ground. Dek climbs up the back of the exosuit and rips out cables, weakening it. Thesa throws an ice grenade at the Kalisk, but Deke strikes the object with a metal bar, deflecting it. The ice bursts over the suit's arm, which loses control, releases the Kalisk, and lunges at the exosuit, breaking it in two. The upper part crashes down hard, and the Kalisk eats Thesa before letting out a roar of victory. Deke, Tia, and Bad regroup and watch as the enormous creature recognizes its offspring. Deke, moved, approaches and presses his forehead against the Kalisk's as a sign of respect. But suddenly, the Kalisk explodes due to an ice grenade that Thesa had left activated inside its stomach. The synthetic, badly injured but still alive, advances toward Tia with the intention of killing her. Before she can succeed, Deke impales her from behind with his improvised spear, finishing her off once and for all. Buddha cuts off Thesa's head and takes it as a trophy. Sometime later, Dek returns to Yautja Prime and presents Thesa's head before his father, expecting approval. However, his father still sees him as a disgrace and orders 2 guards to kill him. Dek quickly moves ahead and defeats them without difficulty. Then he confronts his father, who activates his invisibility cloak. Dek powers up a ship's engines to create a sandstorm, which reveals his location, allowing him to cut off his arm and trap him in an energy cage. His father asks him to take his place in the group, but Dek says he already has one. Meanwhile, Bud, now an adult and aggressive, eats Dek's father's head. Tia celebrates his victory, while Dek takes his father's cloak as a sign of his new strength and leadership. Suddenly, a new ship descends. Dek looks firmly and says it is his mother, thus ending the movie.
More videos created for you on screen. If you like this channel, subscribe and turn on notifications.